Hi, this is my review of The Graveyard of Heroes fantasy role-playing game. Graveyard of Heroes is a game that combines classic elements of old-school Renaissance type of games with modern sensibilities. It puts great emphasis on character death and the legacy that results of such an event. Now, let's talk about the quality of the PDF. My only criticism of the quality is that this document is not bookmarked, so it's going to be somewhat difficult to move or navigate through the 191 pages. So I hope that will be corrected in the future if possible. But despite that, the quality is great. You have these awesome looking illustrations in black and white, old school in style. In fact, one of my favorite fantasy illustrators, William McCausland, does some work for this book. And as many of you know, William McCausland is also quite skilled at post-apocalyptic type of illustrations. He's the designer of the Mutant Epoch role-playing game. I recommend that you check it out. So the illustrations are great, the graphic design and layout is also excellent. It's quite nostalgic, quite old school, and Matthew Veers, the author of this book, has a very nice writing style. This is one of those books that you simply cannot put down. I found myself like coming back to it every time I got like a bit of free time. It's one of those books that you read like dozens of pages and you don't even notice. So the quality overall is pretty good, and everything is well organized and written. Now let's talk about the contents. First, you have a really nice foreword that gives you a bit of the inspiration of the author, how he created this game, how he tried to like perfect, at least in his vision, that old school type of gameplay. And so you have a great chapter, that is chapter 1, telling you how to get started. It tells you all about the dice and the concepts, the terminology. So someone who has never played role-playing games before, this is a great introduction specifically to the old school style of things. Something that I also really like is that you have these little text boxes and you have death talking to you. It's basically like the force of death that inevitably falls upon all of the player characters unless they reach some sort of a magical way to escape their destiny. And death is constantly giving you tips, but at the same time it's mocking you. Something like, oh, you want to be a hero? Good, your struggle amuses me. And or something like the sands of time are already flowing and death is inevitable. And it's constantly giving you tips and mocking you. It's really nice. And then you have more details on the different terminology of the game, because even if you are a grognard and you haven't played role-playing games for some time, there will be some concepts that you need to check out, such as attack rating, danger level, defense rating, some of the things that are key to understanding the structure of this game. Now let's talk about character creation. You create characters following 10 easy steps. You choose your race, you roll for traits, you record your racial abilities and flaws, you decide the character concept, choose skills and abilities, roll for life points by equipment, you fill in some details concerning defense, attack, and luck, and then you fill in the final details, name, morals, personality, etc. Now let's take a look at each of these steps. When it comes to the race, this game is quite flexible. You can play any racial concept that you want. You can play as humans, but there are also many ways to play around with the character concept that you want. You can use non-human races. Before we get into that, let's talk about traits. You roll three six-sided dice to find your trait value. However, the lower that you roll is the better. Because, for example, if you roll an 18, that is, you score 3 sixes in a 3 six-sided dice, you get a trait value of 1, so you have to roll as low as possible. Because if you roll a 3, that is 3 ones, you get a trait value of 7. And for example, let's say you have a trait value in might of 1, you would get a -3 to melee hit and damage rolls. but if you have a trait of 7, you will get a +3 to melee hit and damage. And this applies to many other traits that are might, agility, health, mind, insight, and social. They all have a very important or significant part in how your character is going to work as he goes through all of those dungeons and forests. That's pretty self-explanatory, but for example, let me give you some more details. Agility is good for hitting with range weapons and defense rating, but you also get to roll your health. That this gives you a bonus to your life points. And when it comes to mind, this is very important for wizards, because not only you will be able to cast more spells per day, you will also get more languages to learn. And when it comes to insight, you have a modification to your luck group rolls, but you also have a greater number of divine spells to cast. Social has to do with your hireling morale. That is, this gives you a better chance of keeping your hirelings after an adventure or during very dangerous situations. You record your racial abilities and flaws. You have depends on the race, but for example, you usually have like something that you are really good at and something that you're not very good at dealing with. We'll talk about that later on. This is a classless system. You can have any character that you want. You can specialize your character in any sort of area. If you want to create like a sort of like a magical thief, you can have that. Or you can go focus completely on the warrior side of things, or the spellcaster, either divine or arcane. You can also focus on that. And so this is also determined by the abilities that you choose and your skills. And we will get into that in a bit. But for now, basically abilities are natural talents or feats that your character discovers or develops throughout his career. And skills are more specialized or focused way on being proficient during different checks and rolls or tasks. Now when it comes to life points, this game is very strict about dying. If you get your life points to 0, you are going to die, and resurrection here is quite difficult. It's usually quite short, that is, you will be resurrected for a number of rounds or perhaps a few days. Only the most powerful divine casters can resurrect you permanently, and even if they do that, they take a few years out of your lifespan, so eventually death will come for you, unless there is some sort of like epic or supernatural way to become immortal. So then you buy your equipment and you check your other statistics that I was telling you, defense rating, attack rating. We'll look into that further on in the combat section. And you finish off with the details, character name, giving your character a bit of a personal history, etc. Now let's talk a bit about the non-human races. You have a good selection of them. You have, for example, the ape man, and you have above average traits in some areas like in might and health, but you are below average in mind and insight. You also have the racial ability of arboreal, and this is very good for climbing trees. And then you have details on the language that the ape man speaks, the local tongue. This race is very good against poison. It's weak against mind control. You have the typical mortals. This is a neutral type of race. Suggested skills to take to better shape your character concept. Maybe you're pretty good at survival, at handling trap making and tracking, etc. So you have a bit of history and all of the details of these different races. You have, as I was telling you, the ape man, and you have the deodand, which is basically like an artificial human created to serve to serve wizards. So this is a really cool concept. Maybe you are serving some wizard in the party, or maybe you are a deodand that became independent. You also have half fae, whose ability is the result of humans having relations with fae beings. And you have insect men, raven men, mushroom men, you have mouselings, and you have the octoman, which is basically like a walking octopus. If you want to play like a weird character, you could choose that one. And you have all of the details to create your own non-human race. So if, for example, you're going to play Graveyard of Heroes, you could talk it out with the game master to see if the game master will allow a specific race for your character concept. And then you have details on equipment, because all of the different weapons have diverse properties to them to deal more damage to specific enemies. Because, for example, you have the slash quality that does double damage on a critical hit against fleshy or rubbery targets, and you get other things that you would expect from impaling or crushing weapons. So crushing weapons are really useful against skeletons. And you also have other weapons that have the hook property, and these weapons are really useful when you want to dismount an opponent. You pull them off of the horse or whatever. And you also have some other traits such as disarm, trip. Now what I like is that instead of adding more complexity to this old school type of game, these effects come into play when you score a critical hit. So this is a very nice way to streamline things, but there are still ways to customize your character. That is, not to take things too much to the extreme of making it too simple. So you have different types of weapons that you can equip your character with, such as greatsword, mace, warhammer, different axes, throwing knife, bows, etc. And you need to train yourself. Some weapons are more advanced than others. So for example, it's somewhat more simple to know how to wield a dagger when compared to a bow or a great flail. So that plays quite a bit into your character's development and proficiencies. And in fact, there are some very realistic elements in this game. I will talk about that when I get to the abilities. And you have different types of armor. Maybe your character is going to be wearing leather armor, chain mail, plate mail. But let's talk about this a bit. Maybe you would think, well, I'm going to choose the best armor for my character, but this could make some things difficult, some tasks more harder to perform, because maybe you want to play as a sort of like a rogue or specialist type of character, and when it comes to agility rolls, climbing, or any sort of activity that requires finesse, it's going to be quite difficult for you if you're wearing heavier armor. So you have to keep that in mind. There's also an arcane spell success percent that is also affected by the armor that you are wearing, and the heaviest armor also reduces your movement. So you have to take all of that into consideration. Now, when it comes to the difficulty of checks, when it comes to skills, this game handles it in something that is quite popular nowadays. That is, you roll 2 dice and you take the best or the worst result depending on how easy or difficult an activity becomes. Because, for example, maybe you want to jump across a pit, and if it was a difficult thing to do, you would roll 2 8-sided dice and you would take the worst result. And but if it's easy, you roll 2 8-sided dice and you take the easiest, the best result. So there are also other modifiers, probably depends on the situation, but that's basically it. So you have details on adventuring equipment and ammunition. You have all the description and all the information and cost of arrows, backpacks, hammers, lanterns, mirrors, thieves' tools, etc. Now, let's talk about the abilities for a bit. As I was telling you, abilities are like a general way or a general talent to cover different situations. So, but first I want to talk about combat training, which I think is handled very realistically within the fantasy context. A character who is not trained in combat is only going to have a life die of 1d4, that is, you can only get a max of 4 life points unless you have some other modifiers. But if you are trained in combat, not only you will be able to wield more advanced weapons, you also have a 6-sided die when it comes to life points. But if you take the advanced combat training, this goes up to 1 8-sided die. And you also get to choose some other bonuses. Maybe you want your attack rating to go up a bit faster, or maybe you want to target specific vital areas of the opponent. You can train yourself in that and therefore get a better chance to score a critical hit. Because many of these abilities can go up in ranks. You could take these abilities several times. And here's what I find quite something quite realistic in combat training is that if you want to be an effective or efficient warrior, you have to take combat training every time you level up. That is advanced combat training, sorry, because otherwise your life points will not be as high, and you won't be able to wield or do certain things. It depends on many things of the game. And so you always have to keep in mind that you will have to dedicate that ability slot to advanced combat training. And this, as I was telling you, is very realistic because anyone who has done some physical activities in real life notices that if you stop practicing or training, you lose your edge. And so you have other abilities such as acrobatic fall that it allows you to suffer less damage when you fall from greater heights. And then you have arcane magic, which is a must-have for a wizard or sorcerer type of characters, blind fighting, and you have death or consequences. And this is a really cool thing. This is basically a way to play around with your death. For example, maybe your character is going to get killed, and you decide that you have a heroic death, taking down a foe that is perhaps giving the party quite a bit of trouble during combat encounter. Or maybe you want to perform some or sacrificial move, like perhaps you remove some sort of like a pillar or support, tackling it, and everything falls down with you burying yourself with the enemies, and the party escapes or something like that. But you could also choose to survive, but you will suffer a debilitating injury. So, and one that is agreed with when talking with your game master. So this is a really cool way to further shape your character's story. Now let's take this moment to talk about a bit of the legacy aspect of this game. As I was telling you, death is a very important part of this game. This is somewhat of a push your luck mechanic, in the sense that maybe you went to this dungeon or to this forest or mountains during an adventure and you got out of there alive, but you decide that you want your character to leave his or her mark upon the world. So maybe you got to a really high level where you can build like a wizard's academy or some type of fighter's training ground, or maybe you want to become like an immortal lich and you carry out some weird experiments in some cavern or temple. So this is a great way for your player character to become an official non-player character in the campaign, or to affect the game world significantly, perhaps forever. So you're always thinking if it's time to retire your character as you go up in levels, or if you want to push it a bit further to see if you get more treasure, become more powerful, or gain more knowledge. And so this is a really cool way to think about the character death concept. Some other abilities include detect evil, finesse attack, healing touch, linguistics, improved trait. A lot of them are quite self-explanatory. You also have martial arts if you want to have like a monk type of character, and you have two-weapon fighting, and many of these more specialized ways of fighting require advanced combat training. That's why I'm telling you that you need to take it constantly if you want an efficient warrior. And then you have racial abilities. These are just for specific races, like extra hands, in the case of, for example, of the octopus, I imagine. And then you have like aquatic, avian, that has to do with flying, with moving underwater and breathing underwater, perhaps, magical affinity, natural weapons, etc. You also have racial flaws and details on extra weaknesses, such as, for example, short lifespan or trait reduction. And if you manage to get to level 10th, you get to unlock epic abilities. Maybe your character becomes a teacher, or maybe an archmage and you manage to create many powerful magical items. Or maybe you become a hero of great renown, or a high priest. You have epic companions, and if you want like a monster or giant animal following you around, you have the epic companion, epic ability, and so forth. You can even become a noble and have your own castle, and perhaps a village or town, or even great cities surrounding your castle. And this also has to do with the concept of the legacy that I was telling you, because you could eventually become a builder, perhaps even a demigod, a historical figure, a lich, etc. Now, when it comes to skills, they're also pretty self-explanatory, but I like it that they are more on the catch-all side of things than being too specific. At least for this game, it works really good. So, for example, we have acrobatics, arcane lore, disable traps, eagle eyes. Many of these skills have to do, or I would say rather, they are more useful on the lore side of things for wizard, sorcerers, or even divine spellcasters. So you should keep that in mind. But basically, it's just a better way to flesh out your character concept. And after skills, we have a chapter detailing magic. Now, arcane casters and divine casters feel somewhat similar, but there are important differences. Thematically, the wizards memorize their spells from studying those ancient tomes and understanding like the laws of the world. And divine spellcasters enter this sort of like communion or communication with divine beings to obtain different gifts and favors. But mechanically speaking, I feel like the wizard can cast is a bit more flexible in his spell casting, and you could say he has more ammunition. And the divine caster feels a bit more limited by the code that he follows, depending on the deity the caster is communicating with. But at the same time, he's a bit more specialized in other things, because, for example, when resurrecting player characters, the divine casters usually have an edge on that. They cast as if their ranks were a bit higher. And this is very important, as I was telling you, because sometimes you can only resurrect other player characters temporarily. But with this, after leveling up a bit, you will be able to resurrect other characters permanently, even though at the cost of aging. Now, when it comes to the spells, it's a very good list covering almost every area in adventuring and combat. So you have spells such as accelerate time, or alter temperature, animate plant, astral projection, aura of death, breathe water, bravery, contact deity, create fire, confuse. And as I was saying, the divine casters, their spells and effects are related to their deities, while the arcane casters, it depends more on their studying and what they dedicate when it comes to slots of the different spells. And these spells level up or escalate with your character as he grows in power. So, for example, maybe you have an attack spell such as, let's say, Firewall. If you cast Firewall when you are somewhat weak, let's say first or second level characters, you won't deal as much damage because you deal one 4-sided die per rank. But let's say your character is level 10 or above, you're going to deal quite a bit of damage. So this is really good for this style of game, because you don't feel like your spells become useless as you level up. In fact, you feel like the spells are growing with you. Your arcane or divine power is growing, developing with your character's progress. As I was telling you, it's a quite lengthy list. This is one of the most complete old school Renaissance games that I've seen. It contains pretty much any tool that you can think of for any type of campaign. Now then we have chapter 3, which it talks about adventuring or basic gameplay. So you have details on hirelings, how much you need to pay them, and hirelings are very important because this game is for tough players. If your character dies during the adventure, you cannot have another character right away. You have to take control of a hireling until the adventure ends. Then you can decide if you want to transform that hireling into a player character or if you want to create a new character. So you have all of the details on hirelings, the type of hireling, the type of race, different details on traits and where a hireling is strongest at, or what's his weakness. And then you have details on the moral of your hireling And morale is very important, as I was telling you. If things get too difficult, or at the end of the adventure, you will have to make a check to see if that hireling stays with you. You also have details on how to search for hirelings in different towns and cities, because sometimes there's simply not people willing or able to go with you in those dangerous places. And you have different concepts. Maybe you want warrior hirelings, or swordsmen, or bards. Some hirelings are a bit more specialized, so you have details on that. And you have all the information, their skills, combat training, details on equipment, etc. Now when it comes to gameplay, you have all the information concerning game time and movement, and ease and difficulty in checks. And you also have details on luck rolls, because and this has to do with the strength of your character. Luck rolls are usually related to some sort of aspect of your character, or trait, if you would say it like that, and they will save you from certain death, perhaps due to poison, disease, and dragon breath. And let me tell you that poison here is quite deadly. It's handled quite gritty. It could incapacitate you and kill you relatively quick when compared to other RPGs. So you can never, let's say, become too confident on your power based on your level. In fact, I really like how the life points aspect, or hit points for example in other games, escalates in this game. Of course, as you move towards level 10, your life points will go up dramatically, but once you reach level 10, it doesn't go up as fast. So that's really cool. It keeps that level of you could die at any moment sort of gameplay. And it also makes it so that, for example, maybe your character died and you create a new character, but the other members of the party, perhaps in their level 8 or 9 of power, you still feel like you're a bit closer to them in how you fight and how you face all those traps. So you don't feel like you're not contributing anything to the party, and you still feel like everyone could die no matter the level of power. So you have details on combat. Of course, you could ambush your opponent or surprise them, but let's talk about the order of combat. First, you declare your actions, what spells you're going to be using, the combat stance, and then you roll initiative. And it's actually really cool that you declare your actions first and then you roll initiative, because that way you're not always certain if you will be able to accomplish certain things. Just like some situations could become too chaotic in realistic combat. And then you have details on movement, that is the third step. Then you perform ranged attacks, you resolve spells, you carry out melee attacks, and then the other side, who lost the initiative, carries out the same sequence, and then the round starts again. Now let's talk about the different phases. As I was telling you, in declaration phase is where you say what you are going to do. And when it comes to a combat stance, you can basically take a very defensive stance. You can make no attacks, but you make armor saves with ease. That is, you roll 2 20-sided dice in this case, and you take the best roll. Or you could carry out an aggressive stance, and you make an attack with ease. However, your armor saves will be made with difficulty. So you have to keep this in mind. And then, after determining initiative by rolling an 8-sided die, and the lowest roll gets the initiative, you can perform different moves, a tactical movement, or full retreat if it is needed. And when it comes to attacking, you roll a 20-sided die. You try to roll equal or below your attack rating. And you also take some modifiers in mind and into consideration. But it also depends on the situation. Maybe you are attacking an opponent that is prone, or you're attacking from a higher ground. Then you're going to be attacking with ease. That is, you roll 2 20-sided dice and you take the best result. But maybe you are the one at a disadvantage. Maybe you are hanging from a ledge with just one hand and you have a sword in the other. You're having a difficult time. You will make your attack with difficulty, rolling 2 dice and taking the worst result. If you manage to make that roll a success, the opponent is going to make a defense roll. So depending on his armor and other modifiers, he makes a roll and tries to roll below his defense rating. And training really plays a very strong part on this, because for example, if you are untrained, maybe you start out with your character and you are at level 4, you have an attack rating of 9, but if you are trained, your attack rating will be 10. And so if you think you're going to, if you create a character that is going to be like a wizard that completely specializes on the more let's say lore based side of things, you will not be able to go beyond a certain attack rating of 15 if I'm not mistaken, but a full-time warrior is going to reach the attack rating of 17. After hitting your opponent, you're going to be determining damage depending on the weapon, and as I was telling you, different weapons and creature abilities get different effects if they score a critical hit. So criticals are really nice, and it's not only about dealing double damage, it also has additional effects. And they give you an entire combat example so that you do not get confused with the explanation, although as I was telling you, everything is very well explained. Then you have details on character advancement of the adventure points that you need to level up. Now here adventure points, or advancement points are not given based on the number of opponents that you defeat, rather by completing adventures. And it depends on the danger level of an adventure. Maybe you're just entering like a village that is being attacked by bandits and you manage to defeat or drive off the bandits, then perhaps you will get like 2 or 5 adventure points, but a very dangerous place could perhaps give you 10 advancement points. And it also depends on your performance. If you did poorly, you could get just half of that or maybe even less. So this is a really nice way of focusing on completing a mission or a goal. You also get more details on different common adventuring situations, because maybe some things were not covered in the rules and they give you some advice on how to handle improvised rulings. And you have a table to handle how monsters react to the party, more details on falling, disease, poison, and character death. Different rangers for example, in spells, some spells could actually reach to the moon if you're really powerful. You have details on curses, invisibility, and making the section of making rolls for large groups. I really like it because this is a really streamlined way to handle mass combat. You basically average the life points and damage, and you make a percentage roll to see how much damage they deal, so you could have some wars going on if you wish to. And you also have details on disarming monsters, more specific details on those situations that are not explicitly covered in the rules. You have all the details of time between adventures, the standard of living, how many months pass by between adventures, because maybe you're someone who is constantly in the wilderness, so you're a bit more exposed to the hardships and dangers, so maybe only 4 months go by. But if you live like in a civilized or perhaps even idyllic area, maybe 8 or even 12 months will go by because you have a bit more safety. And then you have details on the standard of living, how to handle things a bit more streamlined so that you're not constantly having to handle status related costs in more intricate ways. Here you have a very nice general way to handle your status as very poor or middle class, above average, with details on what you spend on clothing, equipment, food, housing, etc. And you also have different jobs. Maybe your character has a job on the side. And you also have some tips on how to handle, for example, if the characters accumulate too much money, how to give them things in which they can spend that thing. Maybe if they want to buy some palaces or some very nice items and perhaps vehicles. But you also have some tips. For example, you can introduce thieves or tax collectors to give the characters a harder time as they accumulate that, get richer. And then you have information on how to create magical items, which is a very detailed process. You have details on the time required to create the item, the cost, and you can create some very legendary things with this. And you have information on how to have adventures on the water. So if you like naval battles, you have information on how to carry out ship-to-ship encounters with details on wind that changes. sea encounters, all of the information concerning different types of ships, riverboats, sailboats, or even galleys, longships with different types of weapons and details on fighting. For example, you could fight sea monsters if you wish to. More finer points of naval combat with ship weapons such as ballistae, catapults, details on ship and fire. Maybe they use some sort of like Greek fire against you. Boarding actions, combat losses, and some heroic actions within that combat. Chapter 4 is quite lengthy and is quite impressive. It's a very complete bestiary. This is not just like a sample bestiary. They give you a lot of monsters. They feel like they combined classic monsters with weird horror type of monsters. So you get a really nice selection. They come fully statted with information on their treasure, their special attacks, weaknesses, and some particular things that they can do to your characters, and properties such as charm or curse, or maybe a creature is glowing so it illuminates an area around it, or maybe the creature is resistant to a specific type of weapon, or maybe the creature is nocturnal, it has regeneration, it's unliving, etc. And you have some monsters that could serve perhaps as main villains, such as Avarax, king of horned demons. Or maybe you have some other more standard things like animate armor. Or you have the ape men that could also be player characters. There are many illustrations, but not all of the monsters are illustrated. And you have other things such as the beetle blade, the vogon. You also have the Calliope, and this one's really cool. It's basically like a living spell. Between the time an arcane spell is memorized and the time it is cast, it exists as an almost living creature in the mind of the caster. So this is the result of that. And you have some other more natural animals such as camels. You have vermin such as the giant centipede. And you have other weirder things such as the crystal horse or the dark heart. I really like this one. It seems like something out of the more strangest Castlevania games. So the Dark Heart is a demonic abomination that can sometimes be found in deep dungeon vaults. It resembles a giant pounding heart with thick tendrils extending in all directions. As you can see, it's really nasty and it has like these mouths at the end of each, and sort of like a vein tentacle and with thorns. And then you have other things such as demon dogs. You have different types of demons and dragons. You have a devil cat. And as I was telling you, a good variety of dragons. Many of these monsters are perfect to be the main threat of an adventure or a villain. But the more standard or henchman type of monsters are there as well. So for example, if you're having like a wizard villain, you could have some elementals of different types, like fire elemental, water elemental. You also have giant flies, ghostly apparitions, and then you have some other things like different types of golems of different materials. You could find perhaps a hydra or an Erd, which is basically like a magical blue-skinned humanoid with a crown of misshapen horns. You also have lava men. You could also fight against a Lich Lord. As you can see, there is a very good variety of monsters. You also have a monolith monster. Some are quite weird. For example, the monolith monster has a special attack that is basically like an eye beam of sorts that comes out of one of its apparent engravings. You have a mountain chicken, giant penguins, rat swarms, screaming skulls, and of course you have zombies, and many other types of undead and aberrations. So you will never run out of monsters with this chapter, because you also have an entire process detailing how to create new monsters of different kinds and determining all of their abilities. You also have organization tables of monsters by danger levels, and this is going to be quite useful for the game master to create dungeons and just fill each room with the appropriate monsters and dangers. And you also have tables detailing monsters by terrain type. So for example, you have outdoor tables. Maybe you want to have like an Arctic adventure. Maybe you want monsters specific to forests or lost worlds type of environments. Or maybe you have an aquatic adventure. You have monsters here that inhabit the sea, rivers and lakes, or some other enemies that you could find in villages and towns. Monster generators that will allow you to create those adventures quite easily. And the monster creation process is quite extensive. I cannot repeat this enough. This is one of the most complete old school Renaissance games. The author basically gives you every tool that he could think of. It's kind of like he was making this game and he was thinking, what else could I give the players to create an awesome adventure? Oh, a monster generator. And let's see, information on how to create new races. But what about the dungeons and adventures? Oh, we're going to include that too. So that's awesome. Now, when it comes to adventure creation in this game, as I was telling you, they give you all of the basic details, starting, for example, with treasure. So you have information on the types of coins that they will find. Maybe they will find silver ducats or gold crowns, and different items that they will find. Maybe some items are magical, of course, but some are more related to the lore side of things. If you want to create your own campaign setting, you could find some scrolls or books detailing the locations of lost temples and ruins. So you could have magic items such as magical ammo that are more effective against a specific enemy type, but it could also have some other properties giving you a bonus to attack and damage. You also have different types of potions like alchemical fire, anti-magic potion, bravery potion. You have a potion of mental clarity, potion of regeneration, details on scrolls and magical weapons, all sorts of axes, maces and warhammers and crossbows that have particular magical properties to them to affect specific enemy types. You have magical armor, of course, as well. Magical shields, rings of fire protection, of luck, invisibility, plant talk. Miscellaneous magical items such as the boots of entry, boots of evasion, cap of disguise, amulet of ambivalence, or maybe you have the helm of defense, the plague mask, the spider hook, all sorts of treasure. And all of these serve as inspiration to come up with your own items and artifacts. Now when it comes to creating adventures, that is the plot line of the adventure and the structure, you have many different tips and advice on how to decide on a quest. They even give you sample quests, information on how to draw maps, and introduce adventure elements, monsters, traps, moving walls, flooding rooms, illusions, puzzles, maybe some clues or weird elements or atmospheric details. More details on a treasure placement. You even have an example of adventure design. So you have like a starting adventure with different monsters, with a layout of the map. This section is quite complete, and it kind of feels like something that, for example, in the first editions of Dungeons and Dragons, it's something that felt missing, like a detailed chapter telling you on how to handle adventures and how to create those dangerous delves. And then near the end of the book you have the appendices with details on how to convert a player character race to a monster stat block. And you have different sample deities, gods and goddesses, such as Shoptar, the four-faced goddess, and Ishtak, the shining, Lun, the survivor, with all details on the morals, holy symbols, magical disciplines, holy days, etc. This game really encourages you to create your own world, your own campaign setting. And at the end you have an index to have a bit of an easier time finding what you're looking for, and you have a character sheet and even a pre-generated character, but I still think that bookmarks and hyperlinks would be a great addition Now let me tell you what I think of the Graveyard of Heroes. This fantasy role-playing game is quite impressive because it keeps that old school flavor, but instead of becoming like another clone or pseudo-clone and relying too much on perhaps a D20 based system, it's its own original beast. It focuses so much on the legacy that you will leave after your character dies that you get quite philosophical as you are playing. You are thinking of this legend that you are building, and they make you work for it. Because many games tell you that you will be able to play as heroes or epic characters, but here you have to work for it. Death is around every corner. You can never take your character's life for granted. I also like the realistic approach of handling abilities, especially combat advancement and the freedom to customize your character, to have that divine or arcane caster that you always wanted, and with a very unusual race. And it gives you so many tools to create your own race. And because this is a classless system, you basically create your own class. You also have details on how to create monsters, how to create dungeons, how to create your own magical items, how to design traps. This is one of the most complete old school Renaissance games that I've seen. I also like it how they handle combat and how they put a bit of a limit to character progress in terms of life points. As you become stronger beyond level 10, you feel like it reaches that sweet spot before this game becoming too overpowered or too epic for its own good. This is a game where you play as epic heroes, or perhaps villains because of the alignment, but you still feel like you are risking it all. It's a game of push your luck. Do you want to retire your character and build that magical academy you always dreamed of, or perhaps become a league and have your own like overlord type of castle? To perhaps you will be the next villain in the campaign, or maybe the characters will have to go and meet one of the former player characters, now turn into a non-player character to get some advice, or maybe that player character turned into a non-player character becomes a patron. So this is a great way to influence the game world, but earning the right to do so. So those that actually affect the world by leaving some city or palace or dungeon, or perhaps leaving a legend behind of the character that used that ability that I was telling you to sacrifice yourself for the rest of the party, or perhaps you managed to defeat some very powerful monster and then you retire and become like a mystery type of hero, and what happened to that warrior who defeated that evil sorcerer, dragon, demon, etc. All the material to create your own legend is right here in the Graveyard of Heroes, but make no mistake that your heroes will die, that many of your characters will die before you actually manage to get that status within the fantasy world of the Graveyard of Heroes. So I highly recommend that you get this game, even if you are a grognard, even if you think you have seen it all. I really like the emphasis on death and greediness that this game does a very good job of communicating or accomplishing. This is an awesome old school Renaissance game. Well, thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.